My name is Lorraine, and for decades I have dedicated my life to taking care of my family. I've been asked once, how can someone be forgotten precisely by those they love the most? I know you've felt, if only for a moment, this sense of invisibility. I felt it deep in my heart, every day, without anyone noticing. I lived in Lincoln Park, Chicago, where every corner holds memories of laughter, Sunday lunches, and cafes we visited with my husband, Robert, and our son, Daniel. I prepared everything with care. Simple dinners, surprises that brightened the house, small birthday parties with details that no one else noticed. I did it because I loved it, because I believed it was my mission to keep the family together. But something began to change, almost imperceptibly. Little coldness in the looks, veiled comments from my husband's assistant, Linda Mallister, signs that I, in my kindness and naivety, tried to ignore. Today, I want to tell you exactly what happened at that moment when I thought that everything had been lost to the boss and to those who were supposed to protect me. I'm going to show you how I discovered the truth about Robert's will and the decision that completely changed my life. Stay with me, because in the end you will see that even when they seem to have taken it all, justice can come in quiet, unexpected, and profound ways, and I'll tell you how. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. There was a day at my husband Robert's funeral when I realized that all the effort, all the quiet love I had given to my family seemed to be there for no one there. My son Daniel stepped into the pulpit and thanked the woman I never imagined would take my place, as if she were the real family, while I stood invisible, sitting on the sidelines, trying to understand how my whole world could shatter before my eyes, without warning. And it is exactly this moment, this silent and unexpected betrayal, that begins everything I am going to tell. But before revealing every detail, every look, and every gesture that made me doubt everything, I ask you to accompany me with a simple gesture of support. Click like and subscribe, not out of obligation, but as an act of empathy, so that we can go through this pain together and feel, even for a few minutes, that we are not alone in this world that often ignores us. I remember as if it were yesterday the small changes that began to appear in Robert and Daniel's routine. At first, they were subtleties that I could almost ignore. An elusive look from my husband when I talked about dinner, a drier comment from my son about things he once loved to share with me, the increasingly frequent presence of Linda Mallister in the moments that were once ours alone. I felt my heart tighten, but I tried to justify it. It's just the stress of work, I told myself. They're tired. It's nothing personal. Still, there was something that could not be erased, a constant foreboding, a restlessness that grew like a silent shadow over my life. I remember one Saturday morning in Lincoln Park when I prepared breakfast for Robert and Daniel. I placed pancakes on the table, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the kitchen, but Daniel barely looked at me, immersed in his phone, and Robert only muttered a half-hearted, "Thank you," averting his eyes to the mail table. Among personal letters and bills, I saw small envelopes addressed to Linda, full of thanks and confirmations of gifts that he said were for the family. A chill ran down my spine. Those gifts were not for me. They were not for Daniel. They were for her. And with each smile from Linda, each gesture of closeness between them, my sense of invisibility became more intense. At Robert's job, he used to talk to me about everything. He showed me how he cared about our investments and financial decisions. But lately, there was a distance I couldn't ignore. He spoke little, as if he were calculating what he could say, and I could tell something was wrong. Every time I mentioned a gift, a dinner, or a trip, he quickly changed the subject or minimized my opinion. It was subtle, but my years of experience had taught me to notice these details. I began to notice inconsistencies, spending I hadn't authorized, hotel reservations in Nantucket for 2 people I didn't know, account transfers that didn't match our family planning. There were also moments of silent tension that overwhelmed me. Like that night when I helped Daniel with his homework, sitting at the kitchen table, while Linda texted Robert. He looked at his phone often, laughing at messages I couldn't see. I casually asked about the work trip Robert had scheduled for the following week, and he deflected the subject with a nervous smile. "It's all business, Lorraine. Nothing you need to worry about." But I knew it wasn't just business. I felt like I was being excluded, pushed to the margins, and my heart ached with the feeling of impending betrayal, even without concrete evidence yet. My thoughts went back to the time when Daniel was a boy. The nights when I would lull him to sleep, nursing his fever, or drying his tears after a disappointment at school. I remembered the mornings when Robert was busy, and I would take Daniel to school, making sure he was on time, always with a smile, always with patience. All those sacrifices, all the years dedicated to the family, now seemed to fade before the calculated presence of Linda, who seemed to fill the place I had always occupied, but without ever having to work for it. I felt invisible in my own home, a specter of what I had been. As I was organizing the kitchen that Sunday afternoon, I noticed a small detail, a credit card bill from Robert that he said was only for work expenses. When I opened it, I saw that the payments were directed to luxurious hotels and restaurants, reservations for 2 people, and I knew exactly who these 2 people were. My throat tightened, and a lump formed in my stomach. It was a silent confirmation that something was brewing without my participation, a parallel world where I had no place. At that moment, I sat on the doorstep, looking at the soft light streaming in through the living room windows. I took a deep breath and allowed myself to feel sadness and anger simultaneously. I thought of all the women who have felt invisible in their own homes, in the silence of those who care, love, and yet are ignored. And so, I want you who are watching me now. Identify with this feeling. Share in the comments a word that summarizes what you feel. I believe. I've lived this. What strength. It touched me. It's true. Any expression that says you understand, because we are together in this experience, connected by the silent pain that often suffocates us, but which also awakens strength. And even as I felt this mixture of pain and indignation, something inside me began to move. I realized that I could no longer allow myself to be just an observer of my own life, that I needed to understand how far manipulation and distancing had come. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized that every detail, every smile of Linda, every gesture of Robert, was part of a pattern, but I did not yet know the size of what was to come, nor how this truth would be revealed. And it was just at that moment, sitting alone in my apartment, that I felt that something was about to change irreversibly, and that the story I thought I knew was just beginning to unfold before me, with secrets deeper than I had ever imagined. As I cleaned the shelf of my small bookcase, my fingers touched an old, time-worn folder, and when I opened it, I noticed something that made me uneasy. Letters and thank you cards that Robert had kept, addressed to Linda. I felt a chill down my spine as I read each word of admiration, each recognition that had once been rightfully mine, now destined for another. The dates marked years of small kindnesses that he seemed to reserve exclusively for her, even as I kept the house, took care of the bills, and made sure Daniel was always safe and happy. I remembered so many mornings brewing his coffee exactly how he liked it, nights when I held his hand while he slept, years of quiet dedication that no one had ever valued. Every gesture of mine seemed to disappear in the shadow of a favoritism that arose so naturally and sneakily that I almost felt crazy to notice. Sitting at the kitchen table, I rummaged through old papers and found receipts for expensive gifts, reserved dinners, and weekend trips that I was never included in. The sense of injustice grew within me like a tide, and for the first time I realized that my entire life had been carefully ignored, as if my dedication had no weight at all. I remembered the times I had denied myself small pleasures to make sure everyone around me was comfortable, and now it all seemed in vain. And in the silence of that afternoon, I found myself wondering if Robert really saw me, or if I had always been just a comfortable shadow in his life, someone present, but invisible. Every memory of love and care, mingled with a silent pain that threatened to suffocate me, but also began to ignite within me a spark of awareness that something needed to change. I knew that this discovery was not the end, but the beginning of something that would force me to confront a reality I never wanted to believe, that the person I trusted completely, and who I loved with all my strength, was, in fact, sharing my space, my life, and perhaps my future with another. With my heart sinking, I rummaged through more documents and found small details that only someone attentive would notice. Hotel reservations, invoices for sophisticated restaurants, all clearly intended for meetings that included neither my son nor me. Every page I turned was a reminder that betrayal was being built slowly, silently, and steadily, while I remained unconscious. The feeling of helplessness was mixed with a bitter curiosity. How long had this been happening? How long had I been replaced before my very eyes without realizing it? And even in this maelstrom of feelings, a quiet determination began to emerge. I needed to understand how far this went, and why I had been left out, invisible, and ignored. So, I closed the folder, took a deep breath, and realized that I could no longer just observe. Some decision had to be made, even if I didn't know which one yet. But before I could fully organize my thoughts, another letter caught my attention, different from the others. It had the seal of the court, something that indicated that the truth about Robert's will was about to be revealed. I knew in that instant that my life was about to change irreversibly, and the question that formed in my mind was impossible to ignore. What had really been left for me, and what had Linda already believed to be hers? Rain was falling lightly on the city of Chicago that morning, making the walk to the Lincoln Park Chapel slow and quiet. Every step on the wet floor seemed to echo the weight I was carrying on my chest. The chapel was packed, the air impregnated with the perfume of white flowers and the restrained murmur of family and friends who came to say goodbye to Robert. I kept calm, as always, dressed in my favorite charcoal gray coat, the one that Robert said made me look elegant, even on the darkest days. I greeted some neighbors, gave automatic smiles, while my heart tightened with every look that passed me without really seeing me. When Daniel came up to the pulpit to give the talk, I felt a lump in my throat. He is our only child, and up until that moment, I still harbored a spark of hope that he would acknowledge, even if in silence, all the years of dedication I had offered to our family. But then, he started talking about thanks and memories, and my name was never mentioned. Instead, Daniel thanked Linda, extolling her patience, support, and understanding. A murmur ran through the chapel, and I felt smaller, invisible, as if his every word was a blade that silently pierced me. Linda, with her impeccable dress and suppressed smile, hugged Daniel and tilted her head in a way that seemed to say, "I am the real family." What devastated me most was not her gesture, but the way my own son accepted it, without any hesitation or looking in my direction. The pain of rejection burned silently, like a fire that no one could put out, and I realized that at that moment, it was not only the wife who was being ignored, but the mother, the woman who had sacrificed her entire life for those two beings. As I watched the ceremony, every flower, every prayer, every tear that came down the faces of others reminded me of my invisibility, of how my dedication had been minimized and forgotten. I sat to the side, trying to control my breathing, as flashes of memories flashed through my mind. The nights I cared for a sick Daniel, the years I spent making sure Robert had everything he wanted, even if it meant giving up my own desires. And yet, here was Linda, taking the place I thought was rightfully mine, receiving praise and recognition that should have been mine. My body felt heavy, and every beat of my heart was a cruel reminder of the silent betrayal unfolding before me. When the ceremony was over and the guests began to disperse, I realized that there was no one reaching out to me, no look of consolation coming from Daniel. He remained aloof, trapped in his own admiration for the woman who now seemed to have replaced his mother. The sense of isolation became palpable, like an invisible wall that separated me from what I had once called family. I walked out of the chapel in the light rain, trying not to let the tears flow, and walked slowly to the car, each step reminding me that something inside me had changed forever. And it was at that moment, looking out over the wet street and reflecting on every gesture and every word of that funeral, that I realized that life as I knew it was slowly being rewritten without my permission. A question crossed my mind, cruel and inevitable. Will Daniel ever really see me again? Or was it already too late to regain the space that has always been rightfully mine? I received it. Let's write part 6 following the outline. The news arrived in a cold and formal way, as if all the emotions I had carried over 40 years could be reduced to a simple signature on a piece of paper. The lawyer called me into his office in Chicago, a quiet room with light filtered through the blinds, walls adorned with old certificates and diplomas. He began to explain to me that, according to the will, most of Robert's estate had been destined for Linda Mallister. Lincoln Park, our home of so many years, now belonged to her. The vacation properties in Nantucket, the investments that Robert and I planned together to secure Daniel's future, had all been transferred without any mention of me. My breath got stuck in my throat and a lump formed in my stomach. Every word of the lawyer seemed to echo in the empty room, crushing me into silence. Daniel was there, and what hurt me most was his indifference, his cold gaze, and the simplistic justification that Dad had his reasons, and that Linda understood him better. I felt alone, betrayed not only by my husband, but also by the son I believed to be my ally. my heir of memories and love. I sat down, clutching the bag to my chest, remembering the nights I stayed up caring for him when he was sick, the times I saved my own money to secure his education, the birthdays when his smile was the only reward I needed. Everything seemed to fall apart, and the feeling of uselessness, of invisibility, crushed me. It was at this moment that a mixture of anger and sadness came over me, but at the same time, a clarity began to emerge. I could not allow myself to remain defenseless, even if my heart was torn apart. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts, and that's when I realized that I needed to act. I needed to understand the extent of this betrayal. I'm here opening my heart, telling my story. If you're listening, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel because I still have a lot of things saved to tell you. I left the office that day teary-eyed, feeling every step way down the Chicago floor, but also with a seed of determination planted within me. I knew I couldn't just accept what had happened. I needed to figure out all the pieces of this game, understand how far Robert and Linda had manipulated our lives, and find a way to take back what was rightfully mine, even if it meant confronting the most painful reality I had ever faced. Every corner of the city seemed to carry memories of what I believed to be my family, now tainted by silent betrayal. As I looked out the car window at the gray sky, I realized that this pain was just the beginning, and one question haunted me with intensity. How far would I need to go to expose the truth and regain my dignity? As I sat alone in the empty living room, surrounded by the silence that had once been filled with Robert's laughter and Daniel's footsteps, my mind began to travel through the past, as if each memory were a photograph that slowly unraveled. I remembered the sleepless nights when I held Robert's hand as he recovered from a bad flu, covering him with the blanket, making tea, and checking for a fever, even when my own back hurt and my eyes could barely stay open. I remembered the freezing winter mornings when I would wake up before the sun to prepare breakfast, pack Daniel for school, and make sure everything was perfect before the house woke up. Every detail I took care of now seemed like a distant echo, as if all that effort had been forgotten, absorbed by the emptiness Robert and Daniel left in my heart. I remembered every doctor's appointment I booked, every overdue bill payment I took on alone, every holiday I organized so everyone could smile, while I sacrificed myself in silence. The memories mingled with the pain of the current reality. Robert was no longer by my side, and Daniel seemed indifferent, supporting that woman who had taken the place I had always occupied with love and dedication. I felt the anger and sadness growing, but I also realized that every sacrifice, every gesture of care, every tear held back had not been in vain. They were the seeds of strength that I was beginning to awaken within me. I realized that I could no longer just mourn what I lost. I needed to use everything I lived to protect myself, to claim what has always been mine, to transform my pain into action. Every painful memory, every waking night, every hidden smile was now fuel for my resolve. And then, looking at the old photos that held laughter and tender moments, I felt that something was about to emerge, something that would change everyone's perception of me. And the question that haunted me was inevitable. How far would I need to go for the whole truth to finally come out and my dignity to be restored? I sat alone in my Lincoln Park apartment on that cold night, staring out the fogged window, while the city seemed to breathe nonchalantly outside. The dim light of the lampshade illuminated the old photos of Robert and Daniel, smiling at the camera on days that now seemed so far away. I prepared my dinner, simple and silent, but each bite seemed to carry the weight of years of unacknowledged sacrifices. I talked to myself, repeating names, remembering conversations, gestures, and promises that Robert had made that now seemed like empty echoes. There were days when I wondered if all my effort had been in vain, if all that silent love had been useless. And yet something began to move inside me, a faint flame of determination, which grew with every painful memory, every blank stare from Daniel, every indifferent gesture from all those who were supposed to protect me. I felt fragile and strong at the same time. Fragile for having been betrayed, strong for realizing that I still had my memory, my reason, and my courage. In the midst of this whirlwind, I whispered to myself, if you think my story ends here, wait and see. The most memorable moment is yet to come. That sentence carried a weight and a promise, as if the silence of so many years was only preparing the ground for the truth I was about to discover. I stared at the photographs. Each frozen smile seemed to accuse me of not having seen the truth before, and my mind began to devise ways to understand every detail, every transfer, every suspicious gesture that Robert and Linda had so carefully rehearsed. Loneliness showed me how much I could still bear, and silence, which was once pain, now became a silent weapon that strengthened me. I knew I could no longer allow that injustice to go unnoticed. Every corner of the apartment, every familiar piece of furniture, reminded me that I had been left out of what I had always considered my family. And as I adjusted the couch cushions, the question that began to echo in my mind was inevitable. What else was hidden behind Linda's perfect smile and Daniel's seeming indifference? And how could I finally bring to light all that was denied me? I began slowly, almost silently, reviewing Robert's old documents that were stored in a metal box in the living room closet. Each receipt, each bank statement, seemed to carry a clue to something I still didn't fully understand. I realized that I needed to go deeper, investigate every transfer, every expense made in the last few years, especially those related to Linda. I called Robert's old coworkers, people who still had respect for me and the history we had built together, and slowly began to reconstruct the puzzle of hidden finances. One of them told me subtle details of how some contracts and gifts were actually a way to favor Linda, all documented in a discreet way so as not to attract attention. I wrote down every word, every number, every date. My fingers trembled as I flipped through old contracts and emails. A mixture of anger, sadness, and a hint of hope invaded me. I realized that every planned action, every fake smile of Linda's, was part of a scheme that I needed to prove. And at that moment, I sat down for a moment, took a deep breath, and thought of all the women who have ever felt that they were alone, that their efforts and sacrifices were not recognized. If you, who watch me now, have ever felt this pain, type in the comments, "I know how it is," "I understand you," "It's true," or "I agree." It was in this moment of reflection that my determination was strengthened even more. Every piece of information I gathered brought me closer to the truth. Every silent conversation with those who still respected my family's history was an invisible weapon I began to wield. I knew I couldn't hesitate any longer, that every step I took would be decisive in revealing what Robert and Linda had hidden. But even with all these discoveries, one doubt persisted, hammering in my mind. The deeper I investigated, what secrets were still hidden, ready to surprise me in ways I never imagined. I sat in the quiet room of my Lincoln Park apartment, surrounded by piles of documents, old photos, and letters Robert had left behind. Each item felt like a cruel reminder of all I had lost: the recognition, the love of my son, the loyalty of the one I trusted most. The feeling of betrayal tightened my chest almost unbearably. I felt as if every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every silent gesture of care had been ignored, despised, thrown to the wind. Daniel, my own son, whom I grew up protecting and loving, now looked at Linda as if she were the person who deserved all the attention and affection I had given to the entire family. I felt alone, betrayed to levels I had never imagined, and the pain was so deep that it almost paralyzed me. But deep down, something began to awaken within me. A silent, ancient strength, which I had maintained during all these years of dedication, began to emerge. I took a deep breath and realized that I could no longer allow myself to be just a spectator of what was happening around me. I needed to act. I needed to regain my dignity, my justice, my place as a mother, wife, and woman. Every detail I had collected up to that point became an invisible weapon, a map that would guide me to the truth. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that anger and pain would need to be turned into strategy and patience, and that every step would have to be calculated accurately. And then, looking at the photographs of Robert and Daniel, I felt a firm determination settle in me. I would no longer be the woman who expected others to recognize her worth. I would be the architect of my own justice. But even with this decision made, a question lingered in my mind, heavy and inevitable. How far would I have to go to unmask everything that had been hidden, and how profound would be the revelations that still awaited me? I decided that I could no longer remain passive in the face of everything that had happened. I sat at my Lincoln Park desk, surrounded by old photos, bank statements, and letters that Robert and Linda had carefully kept out of my eyes for years. I took a deep breath and realized that it was time to turn my pain and indignation into concrete action. I began to organize everything meticulously. Every suspicious transfer, every invoice, every evidence of favoritism for Linda. Everything would be recorded and documented. I went through old emails, found subtle messages that indicated Robert's quiet complicity with his mistress, and jotted down every detail with the precision of someone who couldn't afford to make mistakes. The coldness I began to feel was not the absence of emotion, but the clarity that there was no more room for naivety. Every step had to be calculated. As I reviewed the company's records and checked old contracts, I realized that my memory and patience, cultivated over decades of dedication, would now be my greatest weapons. With each document I reviewed, I felt my power grow. The feeling that I could finally turn the tables gave me the strength to move forward. And then, I approached the camera, as if I were talking to you, who are watching me now. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. With that decided, I closed the briefcases and looked out over the city through the window of my apartment. The gray sky reflected the silent storm I felt inside, but also a path that I was beginning to see clearly. Every step I would now take was directed toward revealing the truth that had been hidden for so long. And even with all the planning and coolness I had cultivated, an unsettling question remained. What secrets were still hidden behind Linda's calculated smile, and was I prepared to face whatever the truth would bring? I started to seek help, realizing that I couldn't face it alone. I called Michelle Robinson, a lawyer in Chicago who specializes in corporate fraud, known for her coolness and accuracy, and explained the situation with Robert and Linda, every detail I had discovered about suspicious transfers and unfair favoritism. She listened attentively, without interrupting, and wrote down each point with the calm of someone who has dealt with much worse cases. I then reached out to Robert's former co-workers, people who still had some respect for me and the history we had built together, asking them to review old documents, contracts, and emails. Every meeting, every conversation, every phone answered brought me closer to understanding the extent of the betrayal. In my apartment, I organized meticulous folders, combining photos, receipts, digital messages, and meeting notes. Every detail was placed in chronological order, every piece of evidence carefully cataloged. The transformation from vulnerability to strategy became visible with each document revised, with each line of text reread, with each thread of the web that I began to draw with patience. In the midst of this organization, I found myself saying to myself, in a low voice, "If you think you've seen it all, wait for what's yet to come. The truth is deeper and more impactful than anyone could have imagined." That phrase made me feel that every effort, every sacrifice, and every accumulated pain was about to turn into something powerful, something that would completely change the course of my life and the perception that everyone had of me. With every folder ready, every detail reviewed, and every piece of evidence consolidated, I realized I was prepared to move forward with confidence. But the question remained: how far had Linda infiltrated Robert's life, and what would be the consequences of exposing this carefully hidden truth? As I reviewed Robert's old transactions and digital files, I noticed something that made me cringe. The transfers to Linda were not recent, but stretched back more than a decade. Every payment, every hotel reservation, every expensive gift seemed meticulously planned, recorded in invoices and contracts that I now examined with watchful eyes. Old photos showed Robert and Linda at low-key events, embracing in subtle gestures, with smiles that, looking at them now, revealed silent complicity. My heart sank when I realized that everything I believed to be my life, my space, and my family had been carefully divided without my knowledge. There were shell companies involved, hidden investments that allowed her to acquire property, while I continued to manage Daniel's house and future with all my dedication. Each discovery increased my indignation and the certainty that I could no longer remain silent. I sat down for a moment, holding my hands on my lap and reflecting. Some memories, some details, have the power to mark us forever, like scars that remind us of what we were and what we deserved. And you, who are watching me, how about searching your own chest of memories and sharing in the comments something that has marked your life, something that has made you feel the strength of memory? With every email I read, every receipt I examined, I realized that the betrayal was not accidental, but premeditated, planned over years, and it gave me a mixture of anger and determination that I had never felt before. My plan was beginning to form clearly. Every detail I gathered would be an essential piece to prove the truth, to show everyone that my life could no longer be ignored. And as I looked back at the photos, feeling the depth of what I had discovered, a question began to hammer in my mind. How far did this web of secrets and manipulation extend? And what else would I still need to discover for justice to finally be done? I sat at the table in the meeting room, the morning light streaming in, through the large windows of the Chicago office, reflecting off the polished surface of the wood. Linda stood in front of me, impeccable as ever, with a controlled smile and eyes carefully trained to look kind. I took a deep breath, adjusted my posture, and began to calmly lay out every detail I had gathered. Small, non-standard payments, hotel and restaurant reservations, subtle messages from Robert that indicated favoritism. I watched Linda's every reaction, every slight change in her expression, every faster breath or involuntary handshake. She tried to keep her composure, but I could see the discomfort grow, imperceptible to anyone who did not know those signs. I kept my voice steady, without direct accusations, just presenting facts, documents, and dates, letting the truth speak for itself. I could feel the tension in the air, the almost palpable silence between each sentence, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to shrink around us. Despite the nervousness that throbbed in my veins, I did not give in to anger or despair. I remained dignified, watching as my quiet strength began to challenge the narrative Linda had built for years. My every word was measured, every gesture calculated, as I realized that this meeting marked the beginning of a turning point, the first time in a long time that I wasn't just a spectator. I felt a surge of power that mixed outrage and clarity, knowing that each document delivered was a weapon against the injustice I had suffered for decades. And while Linda tried to improvise answers, inventing justifications for every transaction and gesture, I just waited, patiently, allowing the tension to build, letting her consume herself in her own nervousness. It was a silent duel, a clash of wits and patience, and I felt every second intensely. When the meeting ended, Linda withdrew, maintaining the facade of control, but with her gaze now cautious and distant. I took a deep breath, aware that this first confrontation had only been the beginning. One question kept popping into my mind. How far would Linda go to try to protect her secrets? And would I be prepared for the next step that was inevitably approaching? Submission to Part 15 as requested. I sent the formal legal notices that quiet afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table of my Lincoln Park apartment, surrounded by folders, documents, and photos that I had witnessed my entire life. Each notification was carefully worded, each sentence calculated so as not to leave room for dubious interpretations. It was my voice, my authority, finally expressed clearly and definitively. I blocked digital access, closed joint accounts, and severed any financial ties that still maintained a bridge with Linda and, in a way, with Robert's manipulative memory. I felt a coldness that had been unfamiliar to me until then, but it was necessary. There was no more room for hesitation, regret, or doubt. Every action I took symbolized a complete break with everything that had caused me pain, the silent claim to my power and my autonomy. The transformation from victim to active agent was consolidated in every decision, every document sent, every notification delivered, and I realized that, for the first time in many years, I was no longer at the mercy of other people's choices. It was a point of no return, a silent mark of strength and dignity. I sat down for a few minutes after I was sent, feeling the weight of the responsibilities I carried, but also the deep relief of having finally taken control of my life. And even with the sense of power restored, one question continued to haunt me. How far would Linda go to try to reverse or minimize the impact of my actions? And what surprises were still hidden in the shadow of what seemed to be a closed story? When the notifications reached Linda and Daniel, the reaction did not take long. The next day, I received a call from Linda, her voice forced to keep her cool, but the tension was evident. She tried, with all the control she could, to minimize the seriousness of the situation, explaining with sweet words and empty promises that everything could be resolved amicably, that it was not necessary to get to the point of a lawsuit. She said that Robert had left me everything, and that she was just playing the role he had assigned to her. But I knew at the time that her words no longer had power over me. My answer was firm, emotionless. Linda, there's nothing else to solve. What was rightfully mine is back in my hands, and you have no more space in my life. She was silent for a moment, and I knew the mask was starting to fall. When I hung up, I took a deep breath, knowing that this confrontation with Linda was still far from over. But what I didn't expect was Daniel's reaction. He came to me a few hours later, unannounced, showing up at my door with his eyes full of indignation. The boy, my only son, the man for whom I had dedicated my life, looked at me with a disappointment that cut even deeper than any of Linda's words. "Mom, what are you doing? You're destroying Dad's memory. That's not what he wanted. You have no right to do that." He spoke with an accusatory tone, his face hardened, and all I felt was a pain I could barely control. His every word was a sharp blade cutting the fine line that still existed between us. "Daniel," I said, my voice coming out weaker than I expected, "it's not about destroying anything. It's about restoring the truth." But he didn't want to hear it. He was blindly defending Robert's memory, trying to justify his decision to give everything to Linda as if it were the most natural choice in the world. His anger, his contempt, blinded me for a moment. But then I remembered what I had done for him, the nights I spent with him, the tears I held for him, everything I went through so that he could have the life he had. He was so absorbed in defending the image of a man that in the end he had cast it aside and could not see the truth. He had been manipulated for years, just like me. And in that moment, something in me ignited, a deep sadness mixed with the feeling that I might never be able to go back to the way we were before. I looked into Daniel's eyes, hoping he would see who I really was, but instead, he turned his back and walked away, leaving me with a silent pain, the feeling that my own family had disintegrated before me. I know that there are things in life that we keep, but maybe, by telling, we will help another heart to breathe. Enjoy this video and subscribe, and let's make this story reach those who need it. Because this story is not only mine, it is the story of many of us who, in silence, see life slip through our hands without ever being heard. That day, I felt the weight of everything that had happened. The pain of being rejected by my own son, the frustration of seeing Linda moving away strategically, but the certainty that the battle was not yet won. Deep down, I knew that moment was not the end. It was just the beginning of a much longer path, and, as difficult as it was, I was willing to walk to the end. But the question that still haunted me was, would Daniel see me as his mother again, or would he be lost forever in Linda's game of manipulation? And, more importantly, what kind of truth would I have to reveal for him to finally open his eyes? The courtroom was packed that day. The courtroom in Chicago seemed more imposing than ever. I never imagined that I would be there, alone, facing those who were my family for so many years, fighting for justice that seemed to have been erased over time. Linda was there, standing, with that quiet smile on her face, but I knew she was nervous, and Daniel, my son, was sitting next to her, his expression closed, his eyes empty, as if the man he knew was a stranger to him now. I had all my evidence organized in a meticulously prepared folder: financial documents, photos of Robert and Linda on secret trips, testimonies from former colleagues who confirmed what I already knew. With every word I uttered, I felt the weight of what was finally happening. The evidence could not be ignored, and Linda's manipulations were becoming evident to everyone there. The judge, a woman with gray hair and a firm gaze, looked at me with a silent understanding, as if she already knew the pain I was carrying. She examined every document, every photo, every testimony, and with each glance she gave Linda, I saw the tension grow. I felt, inside, a whirlwind of emotions. It was not pleasure that I felt. It was a strange feeling, as if the relief of finally seeing justice being done was mixed with a deep and old pain. And at the same time, something in me ignited. This was my chance, not only to reclaim what was taken from me, but to affirm who I really was. Finally, the judge turned to the bench and spoke firmly. "Considering the evidence presented, I decide that all assets related to these fraudulent transactions be transferred back to Ms. Lorraine. This includes the Lincoln Park estates, the associated bank accounts, and all transfers made to Mrs. Linda Mallister, which are now officially void." Hearing those words was like a weight lifted from my shoulders. I never imagined that this would happen, that I had the courage, the intelligence, and the determination to go all the way. But there it was. Justice was not only being done, it was being restored. Linda seemed paralyzed, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. And Daniel had a pale face, his eyes empty, as if he could not understand what was happening. He had lost not only the image he had of his father, but also of me. I didn't feel angry, no more. What I felt was something much deeper, moral satisfaction, the kind of satisfaction that only those who have suffered for so long can understand. I was finally regaining my dignity, my voice, my place. The judge hit the gavel, decreeing the victory of the truth. And at that moment, a single question popped into my mind. What would Linda do now? And would Daniel ever forgive me for exposing all of this? The court had spoken, And now, the consequences of all that had unfolded were finally beginning to materialize. Linda, who had always been so sure of her position, so calculating and cold, saw her life fall apart in an instant. What was once hers, the estates, the status she had earned at the expense of Robert and my family, was taken away with cruel rapidity. His reputation, carefully built on lies and manipulations, began to crumble before everyone's eyes. The companies she owned, the properties she had fraudulently acquired, everything had to be sold to cover what she had taken. I saw the sparkle in her eyes extinguish like a candle blown out by the wind, and it was impossible not to feel a deep relief, but at the same time, a sadness, because deep down, I knew that she had been responsible for destroying so many things. But the damage she caused was not limited to me or Robert. She had torn the future from Daniel, who was now faced with the harsh reality of what had happened. Daniel, my son, began to feel the weight of regret, a feeling that seemed to cut deeper than any criticism I could have made. He had tried to justify his loyalty to Linda, but now, with everything revealed, he could no longer deny what was right in front of him. He had been manipulated, made to believe a lie. I saw him, so lost, trying to digest everything that had happened, trying to understand why he never realized the depth of the lie that stretched beneath his feet. Shame was stamped on his face. I knew he had never imagined that one day he would have to face all that. He had never known that he was defending the wrong person. The pride he felt for his father and mother had been shattered by the unvarnished truth. In a gesture of vulnerability I didn't expect, he came to me, but his words were shrouded in regret. He apologized to me, not for ignoring me, but for allowing himself to be blind to reality. He tried to justify it, as if he was still looking for an explanation for what he had done, but I knew that the truth was eating away at him inside. What struck me most, however, was not the fact that Linda and Daniel were paying the price for their actions. What touched me most painfully was seeing my son facing the emptiness he felt for having been deceived for so long. He lost more than just the money or the property. He lost confidence in everything he thought was right, in everything he believed about his own family. I knew it would be a long way until he forgave himself, until he could look at me without that weight of guilt in his eyes. But at the same time, something inside me said that this was the time to heal, not to hurt. Justice, which until then seemed to be only a logical response to what we have experienced, now had a new meaning. The restoration of dignity, the reparation of what was broken, but also the recognition of the pain of those who were by my side. Linda lost everything, and I watched her world crumble into silence. But the question that still lingered in my mind was, after all this, would Daniel be able to find his way back? Or would he remain lost in the shadow of all that had been destroyed? After all that happened, I sat quietly in the living room, with the soft lights illuminating the room. The sound of the ever-present city of Chicago now seemed distant, as if I were in a space where time no longer passed so urgently. I looked at the photos that were on the shelves, photos of a time that seemed so far away, a time where I still believed that life could be simpler, fairer, more direct. I remembered the nights when I would stay awake, planning every step, taking care of Robert, Daniel, looking for ways to make our world work in harmony. Each sacrifice seemed to have been a silent effort, as if the world was waiting in apparent calm, but deep down, something was always broken. And now, after so many years of silence, I could finally hear my own voice. I had gained something much deeper than any property or material possession. I had gained my inner peace. The justice I sought was not just material. It was not just about reclaiming what was taken from me, but about restoring what was rightfully mine, my dignity, my voice, my history. I had never known how important this was until I saw myself in a courtroom, in front of Linda and Daniel, finally being heard. It was not just about revenge. When the judge slammed the gavel, a wave of relief washed over me, but it also made me realize what was really at stake. What is most important in someone's life? What is lost and regained in silence? Or what is shown to the world so that everyone can see what happened? And as I looked at Daniel, I understood that it wouldn't be easy, but rebuilding our relationship would be as long a process as the journey I had taken to get there. He had lost his way, trying to find refuge in Linda's lies, but now he was facing the truth. Maybe that was the beginning of the reconstruction between the two of us. I didn't know if he would see me again with the same eyes, if he would be able to understand everything I did for him, for us. But deep down, something inside me told me that the wounds that had separated us could be healed. It wouldn't be easy, But every healing process requires effort and patience, and I was willing to wait, if he was willing to try it too. And then I realized that throughout my life, I had always sought to be the pillar, the foundation of a family that seemed to be falling apart. But now I was the one who was rising up, with renewed strength. I was no longer the woman who hid in the shadows of sacrifice. I was the woman who had finally learned to stand up, to fight, and to demand the respect I deserved, not because someone gave me permission to do so, but because I finally realized that I had this power inside of me all along. The silence that had imprisoned me so much was now transformed into freedom. But there was one last question that still hovered in my mind. After all that I have been through, what will become of Daniel? Will he find his way back to me? Or will he be lost in the memories of a father who never truly knew who he was? Today, as I walk through Lincoln Park, I feel a peace I never imagined I would find. The cafes where we used to sit, the same park benches where Robert and I discussed life and the future, now look different, as if they carry a lightness that didn't exist before. The house where I spent so many years taking care of everyone, every detail, is still there, but now I see in it something new, a representation of everything I've achieved, not because of Robert or Daniel, but because of myself. The feeling of accomplishment, of justice restored, fills my chest in a calm way. Silence, which was once my oppressor, is now my ally, allowing me to reflect, rest, and finally live for myself. Daniel, after all that he has been through, has come back to him, over time, and is still learning the value of truth and honesty. It wasn't easy for him, and I know it won't be easy for me, but I see now that forgiveness, patience, and the rebuilding of a true relationship are possible. As a mother, as a woman, I finally understood that the fight for justice is not only about what you gain, but also about what you leave behind. The expectations, the illusions, and above all, the suffering that prevents us from seeing our own strength. The great lesson I took from all this is that, as much as life seems to us full of injustices and losses, the real strength is in how we get up, in how we transform our scars into wisdom. Love, forgiveness, patience, and above all, resilience are the greatest gifts we can give ourselves. And with that, no matter how much we have been hurt in the past, there will always be room for new beginnings, for the recovery of our dignity, and for finding our true voice. I want to thank each one of you for accompanying me here, for walking with me on this journey of pain, overcoming, and finally liberation. If this story touched your heart in any way, if you felt that something resonated with your own life, like this video, and subscribe to the channel, saying that the like is like a hug that warms and supports the channel, and the subscription is like an invitation to come back for the next coffee, for more stories and more meetings that help us grow together. Let me know in the comments which city you're watching, and let's create this wonderful community where every story matters. Oh, and don't forget to ring the bell so you don't miss it when the coffee is brewed again, with more amazing stories to share. Now, don't go away yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.